Welcome to AppleKnows channel. I am Apple, and today I will tell you things about ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia that are so bizarre, so unbelievable, that you may struggle to accept they are true. But they are. These are not legends, not Hollywood stories. They are real, historical facts, carefully recorded by archaeologists, scholars, and ancient scribes themselves. Sit back, because once we start, you will not want to leave. Let us begin with Egypt. Imagine the pyramids, massive monuments of stone, but here is the shocking truth: the workers who built them were not slaves. For centuries people believed they were, but archaeological discoveries show otherwise. They were skilled laborers, living in organized villages near the pyramids, well fed with bread and beer, and given medical care. Some skeletons found near Giza show broken bones that had been carefully set and healed, proving they were respected workers, not disposable slaves. It turns the entire picture upside down, doesn't it? Now think of the Nile. Every year it flooded, and this was not chaos but the very foundation of Egyptian life. Without the flood, no Egypt. And the Egyptians worshipped gods to keep this rhythm alive. One of the strangest rituals was connected to Osiris, god of the dead. They believed the Nile's rising was his body bringing life back to the land, and they celebrated with ceremonies so intense that the Greek historian Herodotus admitted he could not describe them openly. He called them sacred mysteries. Mesopotamia, the land between the rivers Tigris and Euphrates, hides even stranger truths. Did you know they invented the world's first writing system not for poetry, not for philosophy, but for beer and trade? Clay tablets have survived that show lists of beer rations given to workers. One tablet literally states, 10 liters of beer for the worker. Their writing, cuneiform, was first a bookkeeping tool, and only later became a medium for myths like the Epic of Gilgamesh, which itself describes a great flood eerily similar to the story of Noah in the Bible, written centuries earlier. Speaking of Gilgamesh, this king of Uruk, who lived around 2800 BC, was turned into a semi-divine hero in stories. The oldest surviving epic in human history tells us that he sought immortality. And here's the strange twist: archaeologists in the 20th century claim to have found what might be his tomb, hidden under the Euphrates River, but the exact details remain secret, locked away, fueling speculation that even today, some governments don't want the truth out. Back to Egypt, here is a fact that defies belief. Pharaoh Pepi II, who reigned during the 6th dynasty, supposedly ruled for 94 years. That makes him the longest reigning monarch in human history. Imagine a man who became king as a child, then ruled until his 90s. Ancient sources describe him as eccentric. One record even says he was so disturbed by insects that he commanded slaves to cover themselves in honey so the flies would bite them instead of him. The bizarre contrast of absolute power and strange fear shows how human even the pharaohs really were. Mesopotamia offers another surprise. They had laws long before most civilizations even existed. The Code of Hammurabi, written around 1750 BC, is one of the earliest sets of written laws in the world. The famous principle an eye for an eye comes directly from this code. But here's the shocking detail: the punishments were not equal for everyone. If a noble broke the law, the punishment might be lighter, but if a commoner did the same, the consequences could be brutal. Justice in Mesopotamia was real, but it was not fair. Now imagine this: the Egyptians were obsessed with the afterlife, but their most secret knowledge wasn't written in one place. The Book of the Dead wasn't a single book at all but a collection of spells written on papyrus, coffins, even walls, tailored for each person. Each text acted like a guidebook for the soul, instructions for navigating terrifying creatures, gates, and tests in the underworld. Without these spells, the dead risked eternal destruction. Some of the images are so vivid they resemble a horror movie, yet they were believed as truth by millions for thousands of years. And Mesopotamians? They had demons, gods, and terrifying spirits that influenced daily life. One of the strangest was Pazuzu, a demon with a lion's head, wings, and scorpion tail. But here's the paradox: he was evil, yet people wore amulets of Pazuzu to protect themselves from worse demons, especially the female demon Lamashtu, who was believed to kill infants. In other words, they wore the image of one demon to guard against another. This unsettling logic of ancient belief still shocks us today. Let us talk about Akhenaten, the pharaoh who turned the entire kingdom upside down. Around 1350 BC, he abandoned all the traditional gods of Egypt and forced people to worship only one deity, the Aten, the sun disk. This was the first known attempt at monotheism in human history, centuries before Judaism, Christianity, or Islam. He even changed the art of Egypt. Instead of rigid, idealized forms, he allowed naturalistic depictions. But the strangest part is his own appearance and statues: elongated head, thin body, wide hips. Some historians suggested he may have had a genetic disorder, others whisper he was trying to appear divine, beyond male or female. After his death, priests and rulers tried to erase him from history. They smashed his statues, destroyed his temples, and even chiseled his name out of monuments. Yet he survives in records as the pharaoh who challenged thousands of years of belief. In Mesopotamia, their cities were guarded not just by walls but by colossal statues called lamassu. These were hybrid beings, human-headed, with the body of a bull or lion, and wings of an eagle. They stood at gates, intimidating everyone with their massive presence. Archaeologists found them weighing over 10 tons, yet somehow the ancient Assyrians transported and raised them without modern machinery. And here is a detail that shocks even today: from the front, the lamassu appears to stand still, but from the side, it looks like it is walking. The sculptors deliberately created this illusion of motion thousands of years before optical illusions were studied scientifically. Back in Egypt, you have probably heard of mummies, but here's what few people know: not only pharaohs and nobles were mummified. Cats, dogs, crocodiles, baboons, even ibises were mummified by the millions. Why? They were sacred to different gods. For example, cats were connected to Batet, the goddess of protection. Archaeologists have uncovered entire cemeteries with nothing but mummified animals. One site held over 4 million mummified ibises. Imagine that number: millions of birds sacrificed and carefully wrapped, all to keep divine order. And Mesopotamia was no less extreme. They practiced divination through the liver of sheep. Yes, priests would sacrifice animals and then carefully examine the liver, believing its shape and marks revealed the will of the gods. They even made clay models of livers to train students in this strange art. To them, the universe spoke not through stars or visions alone but through the organs of a slaughtered animal. It may sound grotesque today, but for Mesopotamians, this was advanced science. Egypt had its share of dark mysteries as well. One pharaoh, Djoser, left behind the Step Pyramid, the very first pyramid in history, designed by his genius architect Imhotep. Imhotep later became so legendary that Egyptians worshipped him as a god of wisdom and medicine. Think about it: a real human being, turned into a deity because his knowledge was beyond what people could understand. And here's another eerie fact: when Napoleon invaded Egypt in 1798, he entered the Great Pyramid of Giza, stood alone in the king's chamber, and when he came out, he was pale and shaken. He refused to say what he had experienced inside and carried the secret to his grave. In Mesopotamia, kings also sought immortality, but through brutal power. The Assyrian king Ashurbanipal not only conquered lands but also built one of the world's first great libraries in Nineveh, with over 30,000 clay tablets. That library included stories, laws, medical texts, and astronomical records. Yet, at the same time, Ashurbanipal boasted in inscriptions about torturing enemies, tearing out tongues, and burning people alive. He preserved knowledge for eternity while destroying human lives in the most horrific ways. That terrifying contradiction. Let us look at the Great Pyramid of Giza again. Everyone knows it is enormous, but most people don't realize how precise it is. The sides of the base differ in length by less than 5 centimeters. That is almost impossible to achieve even with today's technology when you consider the scale. The pyramid is aligned almost perfectly to true north, off by just a fraction of a degree. And here is the shattering detail: for thousands of years, it was the tallest human-made structure on Earth, until the Eiffel Tower was built in 1889. Imagine that ancient builders achieved something that modern humanity did not surpass until barely over a century ago. Mesopotamia also carried secrets in the sky. Their priests carefully studied the stars, and they were among the first to chart the movements of planets. They knew about Jupiter, Venus, Saturn, and even recognized the retrograde motion of Mars. Clay tablets from Babylon contain calculations so advanced that modern scientists only recently understood them. They used a form of geometry to predict planetary positions, almost 1,400 years before European mathematicians did anything similar. In other words, they were doing astronomy at a level that should not have been possible in the 2nd millennium BC. Now back to Egypt, with something that feels more unsettling. Pharaohs were buried with treasures, but also with servants who were expected to follow them into the afterlife. In the earliest dynasties, when a king died, dozens or even hundreds of attendants were killed and buried in his tomb to serve him forever. Later, the Egyptians replaced this horrific practice with shapi figurines, small statues placed in tombs, magically meant to come alive and work for the deceased in the afterlife. What began with real human sacrifice turned into a symbolic ritual, but the origin was brutally real. Mesopotamian rituals could be just as disturbing. One ceremony called the substitute king ritual was designed to trick fate. If astrologers predicted doom for the king, an eclipse or bad omen, they would put a commoner on the throne temporarily. That man was dressed like the king, treated like the king, and then, after the danger passed, he was executed. The real king returned to his throne safe, believing the bad fate had been absorbed by the substitute. Imagine the psychological weight of knowing you lived only to die in place of another man's destiny. And here's another Egyptian fact that feels almost impossible. The Temple of Karnak, dedicated to Ammonius, covers such a vast area that it could fit the entire Notre Dame Cathedral inside several times over. Its great hypostyle hall contains 134 massive stone columns, some over 20 meters tall, carved and painted thousands of years ago. Even today, engineers debate how the Egyptians lifted these stones into place. The sheer scale is overwhelming, but what's even more striking is the idea. Every column was meant to represent a papyrus stalk, turning the hall into a stone version of the marsh where creation itself began. They were not building just architecture, they were recreating the universe in stone. And in Mesopotamia, they too reached for the heavens. The ziggurats, step-like temples, were not tombs but stairways to the gods. The most famous, the Ziggurat of Babylon, is believed to be the Tower of Babel described in the Bible. It was said to rise over 90 meters into the sky, painted in bright colors, dominating the city. Priests would climb it to perform rituals, believing they could connect heaven and earth. But here is the eerie truth: nothing of it remains today. It was dismantled, brick by brick, over centuries, leaving only fragments. Something that once stood as the pride of Mesopotamia now exists only in memory and legend. And yet, both Egypt and Mesopotamia share one chilling fact: their civilizations were obsessed with time, cycles, and eternity. Egyptians measured time with shadow clocks and water clocks. Mesopotamians gave us the division of hours into 60 minutes, and minutes into 60 seconds. Every time you look at a watch today, you are still living under Mesopotamian mathematics. Their obsession with measuring reality shaped how we all experience life, thousands of years later. In Egypt, the obsession with the afterlife led to experiments on the human body that few dare to talk about. Mummification wasn't just wrapping in bandages, it was a highly advanced chemical process. The embalmers removed the brain through the nose using hooks, dried the body with natron salts, and filled it with resins and oils that modern chemists still struggle to replicate. Some of these substances had antibacterial properties that preserved flesh for thousands of years. The shocking part? When scientists tried to reproduce the ancient recipe in labs, they admitted the Egyptians' knowledge of chemistry was far beyond what anyone expected for that era. Meanwhile, in Mesopotamia, writing didn't just record laws or trade, it recorded curses. Archaeologists found clay tablets inscribed with maledictions so dark that they read like horror spells. For example, a curse might call upon gods to destroy the house, family, and even unborn children of anyone who tampered with the tablet. Some included gruesome imagery of demons tearing apart victims. The idea was that words themselves carried supernatural power. Imagine living in a world where language was not only communication but a weapon of divine destruction. Back to Egypt, one pharaoh stands out for sheer mystery: Tutankhamun. Everyone knows his golden mask, but fewer know about the curse connected to his tomb. When Howard Carter's team opened it in 1922, a series of strange deaths followed. Lord Carnarvon, who funded the expedition, died shortly after from an infected mosquito bite. Newspapers fueled the idea of a curse of the pharaoh, and even today some argue that ancient toxins sealed in the tomb might have caused illnesses. What's chilling is that Tutankhamun himself was buried in a hurry, with evidence suggesting his tomb was not originally meant for him. His death at only 18 years old remains one of history's most debated mysteries. Mesopotamia hides a similar enigma in its mythology. Their gods were not gentle creators, they were violent beings. According to the Babylonian creation myth, Enuma Elish, the world was formed from the corpse of a murdered goddess, Tiamat. Her body was split in two, one half became the heavens, the other the earth. From the start, the universe itself was built on chaos and death. This worldview shaped their society. Life was fragile, the gods were dangerous, and survival depended on constant offerings, rituals, and fear. Unlike Egypt, which promised eternal life, Mesopotamia's afterlife was grim, a dark, dusty underworld where souls ate clay and drank dirty water forever. Egypt, however, had its own share of shadows. In Deir al-Medina, the village of the workers who built the Valley of the King's Tombs, archaeologists discovered graffiti left behind by the workers themselves. Some of it was humorous, mocking their overseers, but some revealed something darker: corruption, strikes, and even tomb robbing by the very men who built the royal graves. The people who carved eternal monuments for pharaohs were also stealing from them. The contrast between glory and theft exposes the raw humanity behind the sacred image of Egypt. And Mesopotamia? They mastered warfare in ways that seem terrifyingly modern. The Assyrians were the first to use psychological terror as a weapon. Their inscriptions proudly describe flaying enemies alive, piling skulls at city gates, and deporting entire populations. This wasn't madness, it was strategy. By spreading fear, they broke resistance before battles even began. They combined brutality with efficiency, building the foundations of empire that later civilizations copied. What shocks us today was their formula for survival and domination. One last fact for now: the calendar you use, the 12 months of the year, traces its roots back to Mesopotamia. They divided the year based on lunar cycles, and their system influenced the Babylonian calendar, which later influenced the Hebrew calendar, and eventually the Roman one. Even Egypt contributed with its solar calendar of 365 days. The way we measure our entire existence, days, months, years, comes directly from the obsessions of two ancient civilizations. Let us start in Egypt with something that feels almost impossible: electricity. No, not light bulbs, but in the Temple of Hathor at Dendera, archaeologists discovered reliefs that seem to show objects resembling giant bulbs with cables connected to a box. Some fringe theories claim this is proof the Egyptians had some form of electrical knowledge, though mainstream scholars interpret it differently, as symbolic depictions of mythology. Still, the mystery remains: how do carvings from 2,000 years ago look so much like modern technology? Whether coincidence or lost knowledge, it continues to fuel debates. Now to Mesopotamia, where something equally strange exists: the Baghdad battery. This is a 2,000-year-old clay jar with a copper cylinder and iron rod inside. Some scientists believe it may have functioned as a primitive battery, capable of generating small electric charges. Was it used for electroplating metals? For rituals? Nobody knows for certain, but the fact remains: long before modern science, someone in the ancient Near East built an object that worked like a power cell. Egypt's medical knowledge was no less shocking. The Edwin Smith Papyrus, written around 1600 BC, describes surgical techniques so advanced that doctors today are astonished. It details diagnoses of skull fractures, dislocations, and wounds, and even prescribes methods for stitching and bandaging. Some instructions are so rational, so scientific, that it proves Egyptian physicians were not just priests chanting spells, they were pioneers of medicine. Yet in the same texts, alongside these logical treatments, you still find magical incantations. Science and superstition, hand in hand, guiding life and death. In Mesopotamia, the same mix appears. The Assyrian king Ashurbanipal's library included medical texts describing treatments for illnesses, but many involved terrifying rituals. To cure a disease, a patient might wear an amulet inscribed with spells, or a priest might pour beer over a figurine representing the sickness and smash it. Imagine believing that your fever was a demon crawling inside your body, and the cure was not only herbs but also breaking the demon's body to set yourself free. Egypt also concealed another disturbing fact about mummies. In medieval Europe, powdered mummy remains were ground up and sold as medicine. Yes, for centuries, Europeans literally ate the bodies of ancient Egyptians, believing the preserved flesh had healing powers. Apothecaries sold it as a cure for everything from headaches to internal bleeding. The craze lasted until the 19th century. Think about that, pharaohs and common Egyptians, embalmed for eternity, were dug up and consumed like drugs by people thousands of years later. Mesopotamia left behind equally eerie legacies. In their cities, archaeologists have discovered thousands of small clay tablets inscribed with astronomical omens. They tracked eclipses, comets, and planetary alignments, believing each one carried messages from the gods. Some records are so accurate they have helped modern scientists date events precisely. But here is the chilling part: when a lunar eclipse was predicted, people trembled in terror. They believed it meant the king would die, so the substitute king ritual I told you about was enacted to fool destiny. The stars themselves dictated life, death, and power. And Egypt was not free of terror from the skies either. In 1200 BC, the entire eastern Mediterranean collapsed in what historians call the Late Bronze Age collapse. Egyptian records describe strange invaders, the Sea Peoples, sweeping across lands, burning cities, and nearly destroying Egypt itself. To this day, no one knows exactly who the Sea Peoples were or where they came from. They appear out of nowhere, leave chaos, and vanish from history. One of the greatest mysteries still unsolved. The deeper you look, the more the line between brilliance and nightmare blurs. Both Egypt and Mesopotamia built the foundations of civilization, yet behind their monuments and writings lie stories of human sacrifice, curses, rituals, and knowledge that feels too advanced for their time. One of the most disturbing discoveries is the screaming mummy. When archaeologists unwrapped a mummy found in the Deir el-Bahari cache, they were shocked to see the face frozen in a horrifying open-mouthed scream. The body had been hastily wrapped in goat skin, a material considered impure, and without proper embalming. Scholars now believe this was Prince Pentar, son of Pharaoh Ramses III, punished for his role in a conspiracy to assassinate his father. He may have been forced to take his own life, then buried in eternal disgrace. His twisted face is a 3,000-year-old reminder of betrayal and horror. Mesopotamia offers an equally chilling case. In the royal cemetery of Ur, dating back to around 2500 BC, archaeologists uncovered graves filled not only with kings and queens but also with dozens of servants who had been killed to accompany their rulers into the afterlife. At first it was thought these attendants went willingly, drinking poison in a ritual. But modern tests revealed signs of blunt force trauma on their skulls. They were executed. The image of entire courts buried alive under layers of gold, lyres, and jewelry is as terrifying as it is fascinating. Egypt's obsession with death took another bizarre form in their beliefs about the heart. Unlike most cultures that saw the brain as the center of thought, Egyptians believed the heart was the seat of intelligence, memory, and emotion. During mummification they discarded the brain as useless, but preserved the heart for the afterlife. In the Hall of Judgment, the dead person's heart was weighed against the feather of truth. If it was heavy with sin, it was devoured by Ammit, a monstrous goddess part lion, part crocodile, part hippopotamus. In other words, your own heart could betray you and be eaten forever. Mesopotamia also had monstrous beings that haunted people's daily lives. One of the most terrifying was Humbaba, guardian of the cedar forest in the Epic of Gilgamesh. He was described as a giant with a face like intestines, whose roar was like a flood, and breath like fire. When Gilgamesh and Enkidu killed him, they believed they were killing chaos itself. But to the Mesopotamians, Humbaba wasn't just myth, he represented the real, uncontrollable forces of nature, the kind that could destroy crops, homes, and lives in an instant. Egypt has left behind secrets hidden in plain sight. Many temples were aligned with astronomical events. At Abu Simbel, twice a year, the sun's rays penetrate the temple and illuminate statues of gods inside, except for the god of the underworld, who remains in darkness. Such precise alignment required extraordinary knowledge of the solar year. These were not random builders, they were engineers who understood the cosmos at a level modern people still debate. Mesopotamians, on the other hand, gave us the earliest recorded stories of plagues. In some cuneiform tablets, entire villages are described as abandoned, with survivors blaming the wrath of the gods. Archaeologists now suspect these were early outbreaks of diseases that swept across the Fertile Crescent, leaving devastation in their wake. For people who had no concept of bacteria or viruses, the only explanation was supernatural punishment. Fear of invisible killers shaped their laws, their rituals, even the way they buried their dead. Egypt also knew fear on a massive scale. Tombs in the Valley of the Kings were inscribed with deadly curses meant to protect the pharaohs. One reads, "Cursed be those who disturb the rest of the pharaoh. They will be devoured by crocodiles, snakes, and hippos." To the modern eye, it looks like superstition. But to ancient thieves who risked their lives for treasure, such warnings were psychological weapons as terrifying as any trap. And Mesopotamia left behind a device that still puzzles researchers, the antediluvian king list. This ancient text lists kings who supposedly ruled before the Great Flood. The shocking detail is that some reigns are said to have lasted thousands of years, far beyond human possibility. Were these exaggerations, symbolic numbers, or memories of something lost? No one can say for sure, but the list blurs the line between history and myth in a way that continues to disturb scholars. This is Apple from AppleKnows channel, and now we close this journey through Egypt and Mesopotamia. What you've heard is not legend, not invention, but the raw and often unsettling truth about the first great civilizations that shaped our world. They gave us writing, law, medicine, astronomy, calendars, monuments, and myths that still echo today. But behind their brilliance stood shadows, rituals of death, curses, demons, and mysteries so deep that even modern science cannot fully explain them. When you look at a clock, when you read a story, when you see the shape of a pyramid or the remains of a ziggurat, you are touching the legacy of these ancient peoples. Civilizations rise, civilizations fall, but Egypt and Mesopotamia remind us that the line between wonder and terror, between knowledge and superstition, has always been thin. Thank you for listening. This has been Apple from AppleKnows channel. Until next time, remember, the past is never really dead. It waits beneath the sand, on broken clay tablets, and sometimes in the echoes of your own daily life.